the Lawyers Collective has been actively involved in human rights litigation and advocacy for the rights of the most vulnerable and marginalized members of the Indian society. Prashant Bhushan, on the other hand, is another well-known legal mind India has produced, who is a public interest lawyer in the Supreme Court of India. He was an active member of the fraction of the India Against Corruption movement. Recently, he stood up for freedom of expression and spoke for many people and in India and in global diaspora who believed in free speech and the fundamental constitutional guarantees offered to every Indian citizen. But one thing that really struck me was his conviction with which he stood in the Oxford Union debate a couple of years ago and said, and I quote, "In the name of democracy, in the name of the Constitution, in the name of science and reason, in the name of civilization itself, Modi government must go," and I unquote. So that said, we know that we have the power panel today, so let's get started. I'll have some questions and I'll give opportunities to both of them to respond. The first is that the phrase that judicial independence is under threat was used by former Chief Justice of India, Ranjan Gogoi, almost as a defense to the sexual assault allegations raised against him. Recently, the judicial independence was used as a reasoning to dodge the RTI Act. The judicial independence is also said to be quote-unquote under threat by a left lobby, which apparently holds judges at ransom. But then again, many have argued that accountability is a crucial aspect of ensuring judicial independence. How do you see and define independence within the judiciary? That's the one part. And do you think that accountability is often portrayed as a threat today? And in doing so, are the courts also creating a perception of threat more like a false positive argument, something similar to what the current government often does by delegitimizing any critique in the garb of anti-national or other labels that we are well aware of? In other words, is the judiciary above questioning from its citizenry? And we have the floor to both our panelists to answer, whoever wants to go first. Thank you.
Indira ji, would you like to go?
Yes. Manish, I think your question is extraordinarily well framed. And very few people ask this question. We tend to talk about independence of the judiciary in a vacuum. But the way this question has been framed, it has been located in the here and now in the context of what we are facing today. Now, here's my analysis. We know that Indian society is deeply polarized. It's like, if you're not with us, you're against us. It's a continuation of that debate. But I can tell you that what deeply shocked me about a year ago, a little over a year ago, was when I saw this debate enter the corridors of the courtroom. I have been around for the last 50 to 60 years in the courtrooms, and I have never seen this happen. I've always seen the legal profession behave in court like lawyers. Today, I'm seeing the lawyers behave in court like politicians. And let me tell you that this first came home to me when Prashant Bhushan was called upon to defend himself before Justice Deepak Mishra. In fact, notice was issued to him to appear in court. Now, the court was jam-packed with what I can only describe as anti-Prashant people. But if you extend it, they will be the people who tell us, all of us, that we are anti-national. And he couldn't even make his way through the corridor of the court to get to the front line. And people in the audience were trying to shout him down. That's the day I realized that the legal profession in this country has changed dramatically from, let's say, even 5 years before. So what you're seeing really is party spokespersons entering the corridors of the court, addressing the court, not as lawyers, but as party spokespersons. So there is a political, and when I say political, I mean party political. I'm talking about partisan politics. I'm not talking about politics in the clean sense of the word, where all of us are political. None of us can say that we don't have a certain ideological alignment, My own is to support democracy in every forum, including in the courtroom, the rule of law, the basic features of the Constitution. But this, for me, was a turning point. And that, I think, answers your question. Yes, the court is now being used as a forum
Mhm.
to propound a theory that some of us are anti-national, that we are leftists, and we are trying to attack the court through the medium of advocacy in court. And I think this is a very, very dangerous trend. So I once again would like to say that it's a question that all of us should think about and answer.
Mhm. Thank you very much
Let
for
me
that.
just add,
Please.
Manish.
Yes, please.
Uh, you see, independence of the judiciary really means independence from the government and the legislature, because one of the main functions of the higher judiciary is to ensure that the legislature and the executive remain within the bounds of their power defined by the Constitution, and to protect fundamental rights of citizens against encroachment mainly by the executive. But unfortunately, you see, the judiciary has started talking about independence of the judiciary being under threat whenever anything unsavory about the judiciary is exposed. So they say that the mere exposure of unsavory goings on within the judiciary is a threat to their independence.
Mhm.
So they are equating independence with independence from accountability. Independence from the government does not mean independence from accountability. And in fact, they are quite happy, as we saw in the Justice Deepak Mishra case, where we had gone to court saying that there is a CBI investigation against the Chief Justice involving payment of bribes to the Chief Justice in that medical college case. And this is a dangerous thing for a government controlled agency to be investigating the sitting Chief Justice, and therefore give this investigation to a SIT monitored by the Supreme Court itself, an independent SIT. But unfortunately, Justice Deepak Mishra himself, the Chief Justice himself, wanted to have none of that, and he was happy to be investigated by a government controlled agency.
Mhm.
In a case of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours,
Yes.
or you stay off my back and I'll stay off yours. So they are happy to surrender their independence to the executive, but very unhappy if somebody questions the behavior of the Supreme Court or the judges themselves. Then they say it's an attack on our independence. So it's a very unfortunate state of affairs.
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for those opening answers to the question. The following question I have is looking at the appointments. So, going back while addressing a talk on independence of the judiciary, implications for democracy in 2018, Indira Jaising ji had spoken about the relationship that the bar and the judiciary shares. Mr. Jaising also mentioned that judiciary cannot collapse unless the bar collapses. And recently, Prashant Bhushan mentioned independence of the bar and the legal profession is necessary for the survival of the democracy and indeed the constitution itself upon being served the show cause notice on his contempt case. Do you think there is, the question I have is, do you think there is some unity that is required within the bar that is perhaps missing today? And how do you see the role of the bar as an important pillar for judicial independence now? What do you think has changed from since then? So, uh, I'll ask Indra Jaising to open the.
Um, Look, what you need to understand is really, to put it in a very graphic manner, I think the bar is the mother of the judiciary. Okay. Why do I say this? Because a large number of judges are recruited from the bar. That's the first point that I would like you to understand. Now we come to the next. So, what are you going to get in the judiciary? You're going to get the kind of lawyers that you breed at the bar. Now, if you are going to breed a form of nepotism, etc., at the bar, you will only carry this forward into the judiciary. Now, the judiciary itself is, known to be dynastic. We've had people whose fathers have been judges and chief justices and so on and so forth. But even if you keep that aspect aside for a moment, uh, do you know, I think, in my opinion, today the bar is more powerful than the judiciary itself.
Mhm.
And I say this in the context um, of the closeness of sections of the bar to the executive. Where are they getting their power from today? There was a time when we lawyers got our power from our knowledge. We got it from our forensic skills. We got it from our ability to argue cases. Today, power in the legal profession is emanating from the executive. And judges know this. So they know who are the judges, who are the lawyers who are close to the executive,
Mhm.
and who are the ones who are persona non grata with the executive. And obviously, uh, not so obviously, but what we are noticing is that there is a kind of a nexus developing between sections of the bar and sections of the judiciary, which goes to the answer that Prashant gave. What happens to the whole theory of separation of powers? It's just collapsed. But to come back to the issue of unity, I have not seen this unity at the bar in a long time. And we have like the Bar Council of India and state bar councils, which these bodies are elected. And the problem is that these elections to these bodies are neither free nor fair. They
Mhm.
suffer from the same defects that any other election, like a general election, would suffer. And while we have intense safeguards against to ensure free and fair elections during a general election, we don't have the same safeguards to ensure free and fair elections to our bar councils. So I don't see much hope emanating from there. And statements that which they have issued make it very clear that they stand with the judiciary, okay, or that they stand with the executive. We've had our bar councils issuing statements saying that our prime minister is a great prime minister. He may be, he may not be, but is that the function of the bar council? The answer is no. So I have stopped chasing the dream of unity at the present moment, and I think change is going to come from outliers like us. It's
Mhm.
going to come from people like Prashant Bhushan. It's going to come. I have been victimized. I have been
Mhm.
targeted for being who I am. I have been targeted for being the human rights defender that I am, for the cases that I take up. And so I do believe that what we are seeing in this country is an attack on the right to representation. It's like shoot the messenger and the problem will disappear. So if you imagine a judiciary without lawyers.
Mhm.
Can you imagine a situation in which you have, judges making decisions? No, we have an adversarial system. And if you are going to attack the people who represent a point of view that you may not want to believe in or you may not agree with, you can say that your judiciary has collapsed. So
Mhm.
I'm at the moment not looking for unity, though that is the ideal. I mean, I hope I live to see the day where I can convince all my fellow lawyers that we need to stand together if we want the judiciary not to collapse. I
Mhm.
do think that a necessary condition for the collapse of the judiciary is the collapse of the bar. But I also feel that the bar has collapsed. And therefore, now the question is not unity. The question is how do we break through this breakdown of the bar and return to the values? That's your theme, reclaiming India. Reclaiming India is reclaiming values of the legal profession as well.
Mhm. Excellent. All right. Uh,
I'll just add a little bit to that, if it's okay.
please.
So the bar needs to be independent of the government for the reason that the bar is the main body which needs to fight for the independence of the judiciary. And since independence of the judiciary means primarily independence from the government, therefore the bar needs to be independent of the government.
Mhm.
Also, the bar needs to be independent of the judiciary itself, of the judges themselves. And one of the bar council rules says that. that the bar should not be subservient to judges, and whenever there is judicial misconduct, they must always bring it to the notice of the correct authorities.
Mhm.
And it is the duty of the bar to fight for accountability of the judiciary. And this is the role that the bar has played in the past. During the emergency, it fought for independence of the judiciary. Later, sections of the bar have fought for accountability of the judiciary.
Mhm.
But today, what we are seeing is that the bar has collapsed on both fronts, as Indira pointed out. The Bar Council has now issued notice to me on the basis of the contempt order of the Supreme Court, saying that why should we not take disciplinary action against you because the Supreme Court has given that absurd judgment holding me guilty of contempt. I mean, instead of fighting for the right of the bar to speak out against judicial misconduct, they are trying to just scout out the judiciary. So we will have to reclaim the bar itself.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. So we are not only we are reclaiming India, we are reclaiming the bar also. So that's a good bar to set up. All right. So I'll in the interest of time, I will be skipping to the last two questions I have here. Since Article 370 politics that happened August 5th of 2019, we have seen a consistent use of draconian laws such as the PSA, NSAs, or now the UAPA, pardon me, and even sedition laws. We have seen those implications there, and also particularly their use for the political persecution of the political activists and human rights activists, like you both of yourself pointed out. People often argue that the collusion of the state and its machinery, such as law enforcement, which is the state subject. So in this question, I'm really looking, from a rather progressive lens. So there is a constant attempt to circumvent due process and criminal procedure. In criminal investigation, the procedure is the most important element in order to ensure justice. So the question that I really have is, how do you view these instances compromising the democratic ideals, the constitutional guarantees, including freedom of speech of our citizens, and India is supposedly being the world's largest democracy. How do you see the use of the sedition laws, exercise of laws such as the UAPA, NSA, PSA, and the close cohesion of politics and the law enforcement? What steps should the judiciary take to ensure that these laws are not abused by the political party that has a majoritarian streak and that often believes in using force to quell any sort of dissent?
Yeah.
So if you can be quick in the interest of time. So.
Yes, sure. I think this is the issue of our times. And what it's doing is that it's using law to defeat the law, if that makes any sense. So it's what I would call abuse of process of law, okay? And a concept that is not very well developed anyway, because the minute you say that, you see, the whole play is on the word conspiracy, quote unquote, conspiracy, okay? So you could look at the contrast. You're told that the Delhi riots were part of a conspiracy by students. 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds have conspired to do what? Conspired to undermine the sovereignty and integrity of India. Think of the absurdity of the situation. And then you contrast it with the case in which the accused in the Babri Masjid demolition case were acquitted, where we are told it was quote unquote a spontaneous event. So, what are we doing here? Are we redefining the meaning of the word conspiracy? What I don't understand, if there was a riot in Delhi, how does that become a conspiracy to undermine the sovereignty and integrity of India? I don't get it unless you say India equals our government and we are undermining the government or something like that. So there's a complete, uh, you hit the nail on the head when you said that life and liberty actually protected by criminal procedure. And it's criminal procedure which is being manipulated, which is being eroded. It's become a plaything in the hands of our government.
All right, thank you. Prashant, would you like to add a few words?
Yeah. So there are these three laws, the UAPA, the National Security Act, and the law of sedition, which are being used or rather misused to target activists, students, and minorities. by various law enforcement agencies or investigative agencies which are totally complicit with this fascist government. Now, the reason why these laws are being used, of course, sedition can be used against anybody. Strictly, it can't be, but it is being used against anybody who criticizes the government or criticizes the prime minister or the chief minister, because they say it literally says that spreading disaffection against the government. Now, this was challenged after independence. This is a colonial law. Supreme Court read it down to mean that unless you are inciting violence or public disorder, you cannot commit the offense of sedition. But unfortunately, it is still being misused left and right, and the courts are not stepping in often enough to stop its misuse. The NSA allows preventive detention for months altogether. This is like the MISA, dreaded MISA Act during emergency. It's being misused against these Kashmir political leaders. It was misused against Chandrasekhar Azad and many other people. The UAPA is the most draconian law where they can charge you for unlawful activities which have been very loosely defined. In fact, something like sedition also constitutes an unlawful activity. Therefore, anybody criticizing the government can be accused under UAPA. And thereafter, once you are accused under that, the government, the police can make any kind of absurd story against you, as against the Bhima Koregaon activists, some of the finest human rights activists in the country have been put in jail for the last 2 years under UAPA for a conspiracy to assassinate the prime minister. Utterly absurd, but it's impossible to get bail. Unfortunately, this is a law which should have been struck down by the Supreme Court. It's a totally draconian law, and therefore, or at least the provision which denies bail should have been struck down. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court not only endorsed it, but also recently gave a judgment which makes it even more difficult to get bail under UAPA. So it's the duty of the courts to stop such draconian laws from being used. But unfortunately, they are not doing this duty.
All right. In the interest of time, I did have one more question, but I will just make a closing statement and answer to both of you. Do you still believe the Modi government must go now also for the sake of an independent judiciary?
I don't question of which government comes and which government goes. It's not about any particular individual. The point is that the independence of the judiciary is a non-negotiable value if we want to live in a democracy.
All right. Thank you very much. Prashant, any closing statements?
So this government has singularly tried to suborn and subvert the independence of the judiciary by firstly not making appointment of independent judges, getting independent judges transferred, getting people appointed who are closely affiliated to the BJP or the RSS, or people who lack any spine or independence. This government is also using post-retirement jobs to subvert the independence of the judiciary. And worst of all, it is using all these investigative agencies to blackmail judges. As we saw in that medical college case involving Justice Deepak Mishra, or in that sexual harassment case involving Ranjan Gogoi. And once you are able to blackmail a Chief Justice of India, you virtually get the entire judiciary under your control. So therefore, if the judiciary is to be saved, in my view, this government must go. It must go for many reasons. But certainly one of them is to save the judiciary and save an independent judiciary.
All right. Well, on that note, I want to thank both Indira Jaising and Prashant Bhushan for coming aboard. It's always a pleasure and lovely talking to both of you. And at this point, I will turn it over to the next panelist. Thank you so much again. Have a great day. Over to you, Raju.
Thank you.